Today we are here with BJ Santiago. Thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Gabrielle. Thanks for having me.
So for the very beginning here, I kind of just wanted a little bit of backstory and to hear a little bit more about you.
Sure.
So what were you doing before becoming a coach?
Sure. Thank you. I was actually a CEO of a robotics and AI company out of Lexington, Kentucky, and we were a global company. So we served robotics in the retail space, primarily robots that would be in grocery stores, going up and down the aisles, checking for out of stock and incorrect prices and product location and things like that. So our primary customers were large grocers and also the DIY type stores, like the Lowe's and Home Depots of the world. We would work within those environments as well.
Oh, wow. It's a very specific market that I really haven't ever heard anything about. That's really interesting.
For sure, for sure. We just put our first, well, I'm no longer there, but I retired in February, but I started the opportunity, but now we're just starting to launch our robots in Kroger, which is a grocery store that a lot of people know. So we're very, I'm proud of that for having that kind of reach. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
congratulations. That's so exciting. And so then what brought you to Focal Point? You said you retired in February, was it?
Yep. Retired officially in February. It's just been a long journey professionally. I started my career out of college as an Army officer, so I did 10 years as a active duty Army officer. Then I did a little bit of stint with the federal government, law enforcement, very short. And then I got into the high tech industry in the late 90s, and then stayed in the high tech world all the way through until recently, and just got tired of just the regular corporate world. I did everything that you can do. So I was very pleased with that, very fortunate. And then I remembered back to my career. So like when you go through the focal point training, they'll always ask you your why. Why are you doing this, right? And so I looked really hard at that. And I remember when I first got in the tech world, I knew nothing about technology. So when I got hired, the owner of this small startup software company said, "Listen, I really like you and your potential. So I'm going to stay with you after work every night until you get what you need and you're able to really know the technology." So I remember this stranger staying with me for 6 to 8 months every night, teaching this green guy all this technology. And then the CIO jumped in and he did. And these guys are friends of mine now, 30 years plus later. But it struck a chord with me to get into some kind of coaching capacity and start to pay it forward. And then that's when I had met Focal Point, and I said, this is perfect because I want to pay it forward to other executives and be able to help them the way some executives have helped me. And that's what got me into Focal Point coaching.
Wow. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a really good why. I can, hear the passion behind it too. That's so wonderful. I
Awesome.
So how do you think that has impacted you with Focal Point thus far in not quite a year yet, correct? But
Right. My cohort started, we were a January, February class.
Mhm.
So March was when we all broke away after our certification and started, our annual path. So I've been at it full time for, I'm an anomaly, I think. I've heard joking around at the Focal Point headquarters because I actually got my first Focal Point client while I was in certification.
I
So
did hear about you.
yeah. So when I did that, I had, great area reps because I remember I had my first interest and I immediately went to two people I had met. One was Greg Pessinger, who's our Kentucky area rep. Another one was Dr. Terry Daniels, who's in the state of Kentucky. And I said, guys, I've got a prospect. How do we onboard? Because I had met them through my due diligence of just buying the franchise. And so they were like, okay, yeah, let us send you over these documentations. We'll walk you through it. So I'm getting executive surveys I've never seen, SBR, strategic business reviews I've never seen. Terry Daniels walked me through a role play of the strategic business review. And this is all before we ever got the training in Focal Point. So I went through all that, landed the customer early January, and started coaching while I was going through certification. So it was pretty funny.
I love it. Oh my God, that's awesome.
So I've got those two guys to thank for my success. And then Greg became my mentor. So he's still every Monday we still have calls together and interact. So it's awesome.
That's so great to hear. I did hear about the anomaly of the person that did it in certification, and I it was way back when, and I don't think I ever put together that it was you, but I also have heard about how successful you've been in this past year, and so I wanted to congratulate you on your successes.
Well, thank
Um,
you.
yeah, and then I guess just to pry a little bit more, how did you find a first client while you were in certification? Where did you look? Or was it someone you knew or?
Yeah, totally. If yeah, you guys all know the famous Danny Creed, and
Yeah.
Danny and I follow the same methodology. I didn't know what Champions Network was before I got a hold of Focal Point, but I'm sort of boring, but that's what I do. I use my Champions Network has been very beneficial for me. So when I was getting my Focal Point license and I knew that's what I was making the change, I had a very close attorney friend here in Lexington, Kentucky, and we were going out to dinner on a Friday night. And this is December timeframe, actually, and where I knew I was going to make the move for Focal Point. And so this is December 20 in 2024. And I told them, Mason, hey, I'm going to be doing executive coaching. I'm getting ready, early next year to shut down my corporate world. And he said, "Oh, okay." So we were just talking, his wife, my wife, and the very next day, around 4:30 in the afternoon, he calls me up and he said he's a big corporate attorney, and he said, "Hey, I was talking to one of the private equity firms that I know in Chicago, and it just by coincidence they said that they're struggling with the CEO of a $14 million epoxy and flooring company out of North Carolina. I told her about you. She said, give her a call." And so I called the next day and we had a conversation. Then she scheduled an introductory with the CEO of the epoxy company. And about 2 weeks later, they were my client before January even started rolling into the certification as far as contractually. I didn't start coaching them until January because I was very transparent. And I go, look, even though I've been a CEO before, the coaching thing's sort of new. So I'm going to be learning at the same time. So it worked out pretty well. And then once I got into coaching him, he added three of his senior sales managers. So I was able to stack the revenue immediately onto, him. And they had the engagement was a retainer engagement. So they just added more money to that. And it was a nice start.
Wow. Yeah, it's a great start. No kidding. Thank you for sharing that. So, one of the things that's kind of going through my mind right now with that is how, with getting clients, how has that been ongoing? Have you just continued to use the same process, or have you marketed differently? Like, what is your technique for finding clients?
For me, I grew up, every senior executive comes up a certain path. And for me, it was always sales and marketing. That was my strength. So it came very natural for me to network and reach out. And, being a CEO, I had a pretty big Rolodex. So when I reached out through my Champions Network, and actually LinkedIn was very effective as well, through FP Connect and some other things. And when I messaged to the industry, I was retiring and I told a nice story about my why. And then I also said, hey, if you know of any companies that would need executive coaching on LinkedIn, and that brought three of my active clients right now because they were like, oh, we haven't, one of them was I hadn't talked to since 2019. And my largest client right now, get this, my largest client is the chief operating officer and the CEO of a very well-known big security company. And the COO worked for me in 2005. Okay.
Seriously?
We hadn't talked in 20 years, and she saw my LinkedIn and she contacted me and said, hey, would you be interested in coaching myself and the CEO? And I said, sure. And I took him through the Focal Point collateral, the materials and everything like that. It landed up that same account now, I basically manage their people development program, and I coach those two, their 6 vice presidents and their 4 middle managers for one account.
Wow. Well, congratulations.
But it was a 20-year relationship. I had not talked to this person in 20 years.
That's
20 years. Yeah.
It really goes to show, those relationships that we make along the way and the impact that we have on people. It's so fascinating. But wow, 20 years.
20 years, and just loving their relationship, and they're a really nice account. They happen to be local. Most of my other ones are all remote, but they actually gave me an office at their headquarters, and said, if you need to run your other accounts out of here, so you don't have to drive back and forth when you are on site if you have other meetings. So just a really friendly account. But to answer your question, it's just been more just reaching out. One good thing is I'm not the smartest guy ever in the room, so I followed Focal Point's, instructions pretty well going through certification. I've never sold a friend. I've just told them what we were doing, and if they had any relationships that might need business or executive coaching, several of them could roll back and said, "What about me?" Right? Because I didn't ask them for the business, and they're like, "Whoa, time out. I may need this." Right?
Back up.
So that happened twice, and right now I have 10 active accounts that are keep me pretty busy. I've got about a workload of about probably 30 hours of pure coaching. So it's not overwhelming, but it did take a little bit to get on a cadence to where it was balanced out so far. So
Wow, you really have quite the year here. Well, I've heard from Scott and everyone that you're the person that's hard to get a hold of, and I'm starting to see why.
it's okay. I'm enjoying it. Like I said, I'm just a pure Champions Network type person. I know a lot of people use third-party lead generation tools and things like that. I've only used my Champions Network, LinkedIn, and the Chamber of Commerce, locally.
Yeah.
And those are the three things that I've used. I know everybody has their own model, but they've done very well for me. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. So for selling Focal Point and yourself, that's something that I know can be a little bit uncomfortable for some people. And you said you had the sales and the marketing experience from the past, but how was it to then sell yourself and as that individual, as your own company? And how long did it take you to kind of feel comfortable doing it?
I am a high I, so I was very comfortable right away from the disc assessments we do. So for me, it was very natural. I immediately reached out to people. I started just emailing friends and family members, just telling them what I'm doing and just, hey, you guys know a little bit about me. If you think anybody would like to talk about executive coaching. And I knew from being a CEO that there's a lot of companies that lack in their people development programs. So I knew I had insight into what some companies are missing and how they go about doing that. So I had the advantage of that. So when I contacted some companies, I knew a lot of the questions to ask that maybe somebody naturally may not know because they haven't had a super senior
Yeah.
leadership position. But finding out their pain points, finding out how they manage high potential people, what's missing. I took a very augmentation approach. So some of the companies now that already had a people development program, but I would show them like the Focal Point modules and say, where can I potentially play? And we would customize some things. So what they really enjoyed when I would introduce Focal Point was the libraries of things we offer, but more importantly, how we can migrate my knowledge from my career and customize things with the Focal Point stuff and things that I knew from my own IP, and together coming up with programs for companies. So I think my secret sauce was just knowing what companies need, whether they're small to medium or large enterprise, because I range from everywhere from $14 million company to a $1.4 billion company. So,
Wow.
I laugh now because of the ideal client exercise we go through certification. Just a whole different client base than I would have put down when we went through certification.
Wow, that's so interesting to hear, especially the ideal client. That's always one thing I'm super fascinated about because, some people, it's like, oh, I guessed it from the very beginning and it's been the exact same. And then there's always the outliers where it's like, that's where you started maybe, but it's grown so much past that. So that's very interesting to hear. Thank you for sharing that. And I had a question to kind of follow up with what you just answered there. Would you have any advice for anybody that maybe does struggle to sell themselves or, isn't the high I like you and myself are? But what advice would you give to somebody?
I would look, I would tell people to look from within, really understand your strengths and what you can bring to the marketplace or bring to your clients, but really just reach out. The number one thing, and I know you're having me as a guest, but the focal point coaching community is what really excites me as far as the network of people that I've met, and not to be afraid to go reach out to people and coaches that you don't know and ask their advice on how they solicit customers and they go after prospects, because they all have great ideas, and just ask for help. Like, if you're not used to selling yourself or not used to selling professional services like this, just really just go out to external, parties or people that within the focal point community, and sit down with them and just ask them, hey, I'm nervous about this, or I've never done this. And believe me, everybody will bend backwards for you. I mean, like I said, when I got my first client, two guys that were strangers, like, became my best friends, and they had nothing in the game, right? And they were just like trying to help me and stuff like that and let me be super successful. So I would just say, if you've never sold before, get with some of the focal point coaches that have sold, and that sales and marketing is their background. Tap into you guys, right? You, Margaret, and the whole team, and ask, for your advice. Scott's been great with me. So just dive into your resources is the number one thing I would say, for those guys.
I think that's great advice. Thank you so much.
You're
I,
welcome.
and I think that at that point, you've done a phenomenal job at answering all of my questions that I don't have any more for you. So,
No worries. No worries.
well, thank you so much for joining me here today. I really had a wonderful time speaking to you. So, thank you so much.
You're welcome anytime. It's such a pleasure. I appreciate you. Thank you.